Stephanie, when can they take them? Yes, ma'am. All right. Okay. All right, you touch them and you're in serious trouble. Just keep your mitts off. They stay till Christmas. I know. Now, tell you, Palm Sunday, the first Palm Sunday was really kind of zooey. We try to recreate that here as much as we can, for the simple fact that we live in the same kind of circumstances as the people in Jerusalem did in that day. Jerusalem, just to give you a sense of things, though, really had an average yearly population of 80,000 or so people. And when it came time for the Passover, the population went up to between 1/4 to 500,000 people, depending on the social conditions and the weather of the day. So when it says that Jesus came to Bethany and Bethpage, what they did, they extended the boundaries of Jerusalem an additional 2 miles all the way around, so that even if people couldn't actually get into the city limits, they would still be able to get in theory, by extending the borders of Jerusalem. So it was really, really crowded and really crazy. And when Jesus came into the city, everybody knew him. They didn't know what to make of him, understand, but they all knew him. The one thing they knew is that wherever he went, there were always three things that happened. The first was that people who were sick got healed. They didn't have MDs, really, in those days as we know it today. But Jesus always did healings of people who were sick. The second thing that happened, they always had a party or a celebration in that town. And the third thing that happened is that there was always a huge crowd of people who were around. And so when Jesus came to Jerusalem, that's the one thing that everybody knew. When Jesus showed up, people got healed from their illnesses, there was going to be a party, and there was going to be a crowd. And that was about what they understood at that time coming in on Palm Sunday into Jerusalem. The city itself was caught up in the parties and everything like that, and everybody was just wondering who Jesus was. I came across a poem by James Dalton Morris, and it goes this way. And I thought this was pretty appropriate because this is not unlike our lives in some ways. Within my earthly temple, there's a crowd. There's one of us that's humble, one that's proud. There's one that's broken-hearted for his sins. There's one that's unrepentant, sits and grins. There's one that loves his neighbor as himself, and one that cares for naught but fame and pelf. From much corroding care I should be free, if I could once determine which is me. That was how it was in Jerusalem with those folks trying to sort out faith, not unlike us too. Where you're trying to figure out what it is that you believe and what the depth of your belief is, and how you're going to sort it out and how you're going to live it. Well, Jesus really was God hiding in plain sight. And when you talk about God, yeah, I know it's not working right. I understand. No, that'll be too much. I'll just talk loud. Okay? That'll be simple. Now, the master message of Palm Sunday is that God is hiding in plain sight. And if you don't understand the hiding in plain sight, you must understand that Jesus came into Jerusalem with 250,000 to 500,000 people, knowing that a bunch of them wanted him dead, and a bunch of people really weren't too sure whether they were going to trust him or not, or who he was. But God had chosen to send himself into the world in such a way that he would not frighten people, and that he would come with a basic message of peace and goodwill. The Christmas message, in other words. So, when Jesus came into Jerusalem, that's what got things going. The people were happy that God had come, but they were also asking questions about whether he was there and whether it was real or not. There's a story from the ancient world about the smuggler Nasrudin. Let me see if you can figure this out. Nasrudin, the smuggler, was leading a donkey that had bundles of straw on its back. And a border inspector stopped him and said, "Nasrudin, what's your business here?" Nasrudin said, "I'm an honest smuggler." "Oh, really?" said the inspector. "Well, I'm going to inspect your bundles of straw." And he inspected those bundles of straw, and he did not find anything. And Nasrudin said, "You're not going to find anything because there's nothing in the straw." So the inspector looked, but he let him go. Well, the next day, Nasrudin came again, riding on a donkey with straw, and the inspector checked that straw, couldn't find a thing. And then day after day, for several years, Nasrudin the smuggler came through the border inspector with his donkey and his straw, and the inspector could never find anything that he was smuggling. Well, after several years, he noticed that Nasrudin had a whole mess of new clothes, and he had bling jewelry, and he was looking very, very fine every day. Finally, the border inspector retired. And then one day, a few years later, he saw Nasrudin, and he came up to him. "You know, Nasrudin, I should have checked the donkey's mouth, because I'm figuring that you hid jewels inside the donkey's mouth." And Nasrudin said, "No, I never did any of that stuff." And the border inspector said finally, "Listen, I'm not going to turn you in. I'm retired. Tell me, what are you smuggling? What were you smuggling?" And Nasrudin replied, "Donkeys." Like I said, Palm Sunday is about hiding in plain sight. And that is precisely what God has chosen to do. When he meets you, he's hiding in plain sight. So when you eat a piece of bread and drink a little bit of wine, you're thinking, it's just yucky dry bread, and it is too, isn't it? Sometimes it sticks in the roof of your mouth too. I know, pretty cool, right? Tastes a little like cardboard too, doesn't it? Oh, that's because it's unleavened bread. Remember, our tradition goes back to Moses and the slaves who were escaping Egypt, and they did not have time to make yeasty bread, a regular loaf, so they had to do it unleavened. So it was flat, pancake. But hiding in plain sight is a promise that Jesus said, "I am the bread from heaven. I am the bread of life. I love you. I make promises to you. I care for you. I always will." He's hiding in plain sight. And that is the promise that God will make to you all the time. That he's always present and around and available to you. And all you have to do is look around. You may get into a big fight with somebody sometime. I know you never will. But if you ever do, God will be saying to you then, when you come to church, your sin is forgiven, you know, for getting involved in the fight. And then your job, how do you make a friend? You don't try to talk to them. And that's what Jesus did with people, and that's what he expects of us. Hiding in plain sight, trying to make peace, to have friends. Well, that's the good news, and that's the gospel. And every time you eat the bread and drink that wine, that is going to be the promise that Jesus gives to you. Hiding in plain sight, here I am, I love you, don't forget it. Amen.